So we know we are the product, we know that we are consumers, but how are we produced? Today we're going to explore that question, but potentially in a nuanced way, in a way that will seem maybe counterintuitive, because in order for us to answer or explore the question, we first have to establish what do we mean by a consumer? What do we understand as when a person says that you're a consumer? How would we think that through? What meaning do we actually give it? We only have to refer to our everydayness that we buy, and so we're always sold to. We're always the end for our economy. Always, somebody's always trying to sell us shit. And so, in that way, on the surface level, we know what a consumer is. A consumer is one that buys, and we would say, well, what are we buying for? And we would say, potentially, we could be buying for needs, but ultimately marketing engenders want. And so therefore, we can also go beyond necessity to engendering demand. And so in a roundabout way, you can say that to be a consumer is to buy, but is to be credited a limitation of agency through the demand that we're demand centers. All right. So in this way, we know that we are subjected to marketing incessantly. Marketing does not just extend to goods and services, but to narratives, to what the state perpetuates in order to orientate a populace. So that would be state-sanctioned propaganda. So propaganda and marketing ultimately are the same thing. But the touchstone for that is obviously the person that you are, that is framed through the consumer, that is credited a limitation of agency. And so we can say that a consumer is just not a person that just buys, but that through the act of purchasing is limiting or defining agency. And so therefore, through that orientation, life is a buyer's journey. So we could say further still that if you're a consumer, then life is commensurate to a buyer's journey. Now, will we ever, in our moments of self-reflection, consider that life is a buyer's journey? Is there more to life than a buyer's journey, than us buying shit? Now, this is where the issue comes into when we understand a consumer is just about a person that buys. Because can we orientate ourselves towards life outside a buyer's journey? And if we can't, then there's a totalizing claim on life when life is given as a buyer's journey. And so what we understand is, say, marketing or propaganda. Beyond that, there is what we would have to call existential propaganda or existential totalitarianism, when life is given as a buyer's journey. And so therefore, if you're given as a consumer, if we are a consumer, then ultimately through us being orientated to life as a buyer's journey, we are externalizing when we only consider the way how what we are orientated is through our demand. Demand is a limitation of agency. It's not a creative. It's circumscribed. It's limited. It's through the interest of what? Well, it's the way how we get led, or we lead ourselves through maybe the envisaging, through the totalizing communications when we are sold to. But then we have to ask, well, what are we actually sold? So when we're sold, like a business sells us, what are they? You could say that they're selling their goods and services. They're ultimately selling them as a destination for whatever it is that they sell. And so, marketing ends in branding, and the ultimate goal of branding is to remove choice, because through the orientation, you're going to associate some goodwill to the brand, and so therefore only consider that brand whenever you want to buy something. You don't have to consider all the other ones that obviously sell the same thing or produce the same thing or whatever, you're already sold on the brand. And so therefore your goodwill is monetized. And so part of selling is monetizing goodwill. But that only relates to you as a customer. So you've got to think, as a result of that, we understand that, but then you have to step back that you're the product, and so your goodwill is still captured. It's still captured as an asset. It's still monetized, but it's monetized in reference to what? Now this is where the difference between a customer and a consumer, or the way how we understand understand ourselves as consumers, starts to diverge. Because when you're looking at goodwill and then you work back, well, okay, I have to have money, so therefore the use of money is a consideration when obviously life is given as a buyer's journey. When we are consumers, obviously we have to have money in order to buy, and so that goodwill is ultimately associated with the money that we use. And so you could say people think of money as being neutral or being as means of exchange, but they don't realize that money ultimately markets a way of life for you not to question how you produce yourself as a principal product that you're given as. That's not just for a business that's sold on a customer first orientation, but the whole commercial paradigm. Because if you were to look at it along those lines, well, then the question of money, the convention of money is not neutral. It ultimately, the use of it discounts. It discounts the agency that ultimately you're not credited when you can only demand. And so therefore we can say that when we are sold to, we're not sold goods and services, we're sold the validity of the credit that we use. Now, would we ever kind of consider that when we're considering ourselves as consumers, that our way of life is essentially just marketing a form of credit to allow other people to monetize our goodwill that is associated with the credit that we use? And you'll say, well, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, we use a credit, we are not the originator. Money is miraculated. It's given by institutions that create it, but do we ever consider that the use of money conceals goodwill, and so therefore we can never extend goodwill beyond obviously the credit that we use, because we're marketed credit because life is a buyer's journey and there's a totalizing claim, and you're always sold a limitation. You don't understand why you sold that limitation. Well, you're sold to not question, because it's an orientation. It's always orientating you in a way where you never stop to think of, okay, I'm a product. How am I? We know that we're a product. We know that we're consumers. I know that my attention is captured. I know that there's an echo chamber that I potentially could partake of. Anything, and this relates to not just vying kind of brands. It's obviously politics, when it relates to left or right or whatever, are brands, forms of let's say ways of looking at the geopolitical scenarios. It's the same thing. I mean, so all the vying between, say, blocks now, so between, say, China or America or the West in inverted commas, or BRICS or whatever the case may be, civilization is still commercial. So the principal product, both of them accept, is the same. You're a product. You're a consumer. You're defined through a limitation of agency. When you are sold on the legitimizing a credit you are not the originator of. That is ultimately the reason why you are sold, because through doing so, through that orientation, you never question that one question that we are seeking to answer is that, well, how do you produce yourself as a consumer? So that means to say that for all the buying and selling, for all the selling, it is selling a way for you not to see, or it is selling you on ignorance as a virtue, we could say. Because once again, if the question is omitted and we don't give significance to the way how that we produce ourselves. Once again, I keep on reiterating we are the product, but we never step back from the whole paradigm of commerce to think of, well, what is that principal trade? What is the actual process that occurs, irrespective of whether or not I buy? This is the key thing. So therefore, the meaning of a consumer is not reducible to the agency that we're credited, but rather a claim that we acquit ourselves. So it's the nature of the claim that we acquit ourselves that we have to explore, and that's what I'll do in the next episode. Cheers.